All right, let's talk about it. The rapture. You've probably heard of it, right? It's this massive idea in modern Christianity that's inspired blockbuster movies, best-selling books, and shaped the beliefs of millions of people. I mean, the whole idea is so cinematic, isn't it? You can just picture it. Cars suddenly without drivers, planes dropping from the sky, people just gone in a flash. It's a super dramatic scene. But here's the big question. Where did this idea actually come from? Is it an ancient belief or something much, much newer? Okay, let's get into it. So here's what we're going to cover. First, what is the rapture, really? Then we'll dig into its surprisingly modern history. We'll look at the Bible verses that people point to, and then a totally different way to read those same verses. And finally, we'll unpack why this whole thing is so controversial. Okay, so let's start with the absolute basics. What on earth are we even talking about when we use the word rapture? Okay, so at its simplest, the rapture is the belief that true believers in Christ are going to be physically caught up from earth to go meet him. Now, here's a fun fact. The word rapture isn't actually in the Bible. It comes from a Latin word, rapio, which means to snatch away. And that word was used in an early translation of a super important verse that we're definitely going to look at in a bit. But it gets way more specific than that. The version you've probably heard about is called the pre-tribulation rapture, and it lays out a whole timeline. It all starts with the secret snatching away of believers. Then, that kicks off a 7-year period of chaos and suffering on earth called the tribulation. You get the rise of the Antichrist, and a whole bunch of other intense end-time stuff follows. So you'd think an idea this huge has been around forever, right? Like since the very beginning of Christianity? Well, you'd be wrong. Its history is way more recent than most people realize, and honestly, it's pretty surprising. Okay, look at this timeline. The first thing that should jump out at you is that giant gap. For 1,800 years, let that sink in, 1,800 years, the main Christian belief was that this catching away would happen after all the tough stuff, at the very end, as part of the second coming. But this idea of a secret rapture happening before the tribulation, that's brand new, relatively speaking. It really only got popular in the 1830s with a guy named John Nelson Darby. From there, it got a huge boost from the footnotes in the famous Scofield reference Bible, and then, well, it just exploded into a pop culture giant with the Left Behind books. So if it's such a new idea, where did they get it from? Well, people who believe in it point to a couple of specific verses in the Bible. Let's take a look. This right here, from 1 Thessalonians, this is the big one. This is the main verse. See that phrase, caught up? That's it. That's the foundation for the whole idea. It clearly shows believers rising up to meet the Lord. The real fight, though, is over how and when that meeting happens. And then you've got this one from Matthew. This is where that dramatic imagery comes from. You know, one is taken and one is left. It feels so sudden, so selective. For people who hold to the modern rapture theory, this is the proof text for a secret event. In fact, this is literally where the Left Behind series got its name. But, and this is a big bite, context is everything, especially with ancient texts. And for almost 2,000 years, Christians read these exact same verses in a completely different light. So let's explore that historical reading. Okay, so back to 1 Thessalonians. The whole popular idea depends on this being a secret, silent, blink and you'll miss it event. But is that what the verse actually says? And this is where things get really interesting. The historical view points out that the verse itself talks about a cry of command, the voice of an archangel, and the trumpet of God. I mean, that sounds pretty loud, right? Definitely not secret. And get this. Back then, when a king or an important official was returning to a city, the citizens would go out to meet him on the road and then escort him back in as a big welcoming party. So in that context, believers aren't being whisked away from earth forever. They're rising up to meet Christ in the air to welcome him back to earth for his final return. It's all part of one single public event. All right, now let's circle back to that verse in Matthew. You know, one is taken and one is left. We all just assume being taken is the good thing, right? You're being taken to heaven, you're safe. But what if the context of the story actually means the complete opposite? This is the key. Right before saying that, Jesus compares it to the days of Noah. So think about the story of Noah's flood. Who was taken in that story? It was the wicked people, right? They were taken away by the floodwaters for judgment. Noah and his family were the ones who were left behind, safe inside the ark. If you read it that way, it totally flips the whole left behind idea on its head. Being taken is actually the bad thing. Okay,
So this brings us to the big question. With this different historical reading and its pretty recent origin, why is this idea so controversial today? Well, the main objections come from major historical Christian traditions. The Catholic Church, for example, flat out rejects the pre-tribulation rapture idea. It basically boils down to four big problems for them. One, it's new. They argue you can't trace it back to the original apostles. Two, it splits the second coming into two separate events, which they say the Bible describes as one single event. Three, it goes against the idea that believers will actually have to go through a final period of suffering, not get a pass. And four, it's connected to this idea of a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, a concept called millenniarism, which the Catholic Church officially rejected a long time ago. And that point about enduring the hard times, that's not just some theologian's opinion. It's formal teaching. You can see it right here in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Their official stance is that the Church must pass through a final trial, not fly away before it starts. Phew! Okay, so we've gone through the definition, the history, the key verses, and the big controversy. So what's the big takeaway from all of this? Really, it comes down to this. The idea of a secret pre-tribulation rapture is an incredibly popular and powerful belief for millions of people today. But it's also a surprisingly modern belief, and it marks a huge break from nearly 2,000 years of Christian tradition. And that kind of leaves us with a bigger, more fascinating question, doesn't it? This isn't just about the rapture anymore. It's about how new ideas can catch on and become seen as ancient truths for millions of people. How does that happen? And what does that process tell us about how faith itself can change and evolve over time? It's definitely something to chew on.